I see so many parents who are swaddling their babies and sleeping right next to them. That is not safe. The thing with co-sleeping and breastfeeding, that relationship, I think of it that there are two sides to every coin. It helps to strengthen that breastfeeding relationship. But the other side of it is that every time your child needs to breastfeed at night, sure, you get a great milk supply out of it, but your sleep is compromised heavily.
So I can see why a lot of Indian families do co-sleep. But then my question to you now is then in the US, why are like 90% of the families not doing it? There must be a very strong reason as well for them to have their kids in a crib or have them in a separate room.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Modern Indian Parent Podcast. I am Rinie Gupta. I'm a pediatric sleep consultant.
And I'm Sanchita and a pediatric nutritionist. And every week we bring you episodes where we are redefining parenting in Indian families.
So let's bust some myths and own our modern parenting choices, even if Nani and Dadi don't agree with them. Today, we want to talk about a topic that you may seem like you know everything about, but there are still so many nuances that we need to explore, and that is co-sleeping. And this is something that I've been wanting to talk about on this channel for a very long time now because I'm a sleep consultant. And majority of the time when I'm helping families, a big issue that they bring out to me is that they are not able to get any sleep because they are co-sleeping with their child. So in this episode, we're going to discuss the pros of co-sleeping, but also the drawbacks of it. And then I will walk you through many tips in which you can solve your child's sleep issues while co-sleeping, as well as if you're ready to end that co-sleeping relationship, how is it that you can transition your child very gently to their own sleep space?
If you're watching this episode on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe.
And if you're listening to it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, remember to follow.
This topic really is so interesting. I'm actually excited to learn more because I know about it, but it was a very kind of vague general thing. And I'm trying to think, did I co-sleep? Did I not? So I want to get to the basics really with you first. What is co-sleeping exactly?
So if you look at the literature, co-sleeping can be defined as both bed sharing, which is that means that your child and the parent or the caregiver are sleeping on the same bed. But even if your child is sleeping in a crib or in a toddler bed, but in your room, that is their room sharing with you, that is also considered a form of co-sleeping. But I'll tell you, for the purpose of this episode, we're going to call co-sleeping the same thing as bed sharing, because in Indian families, that is the most common form of co-sleeping. Actually, there was a study done in Bangalore with over 1,000 families in which 88% of the families between the age of 0 to 18 months, the babies that were in that age group, were bed sharing with the families.
Wow. And looking back and thinking about it, in terms of like, I'm from the Caribbean, right? So growing up, we had a very different kind of lifestyle perspective on a lot of things. But now I live in Hong Kong and so close to India as well. So I've noticed that for a lot of things, even when it comes to sleep training, co-sleeping, even baby-led weaning versus spoon feeding, there seems to be a bit of a difference between the two worlds. So do you feel there's a difference in terms of co-sleeping and how people view it on different parts of the world?
Most definitely. So the thing with co-sleeping is that, as I mentioned earlier, right, it's really a cultural norm in India as well as the other Asian countries, but more specifically in India, where, as I've just mentioned, 88%, and that could be up to 90% of the families are actually bed sharing with their children. When you compare the statistic alone with the families in the US, there was another study done which showed that only 11% of the families bed share with their babies. Now, who's right, who's wrong? There is no way to decide that because each approach has its own advantages, has its own drawbacks. We will talk about this later into this episode again. But one thing I do want to highlight is that nowadays on Instagram, especially when you're scrolling, you will see a lot of Western influences, and they're talking about the benefits of co-sleeping. They're raving about it, that like the only way they were able to get any sleep was by co-sleeping. They could avoid sleep training by co-sleeping, and they're just really big fans of co-sleeping. That's great, and I think I'm really glad that co-sleeping has worked out for them. But I think given the context of how few families co-sleep in Western countries such as the US, I think they have this thing that where they want to be really loud about the benefits of co-sleeping so they can educate more people about it, how to co-sleep safely and all of that. I think the reverse is true in India, where majority of families are co-sleeping by default. And consultants or influencers whose babies are sleeping in the crib or who are sleep training, we are having to educate the Indian families about the other side. That if co-sleeping is not working out for you, there are other options available as well. Because believe me, in Indian families, if you choose not to co-sleep, you are judged for it. Like in the US, if you are criticized if you choose to co-sleep, here is the other way around. And that happened with me because I'll tell you, when I was pregnant and I was expecting my first baby, I was thinking about, okay, where is my baby going to sleep? But that was such a straightforward answer for me because I've been told by my mother, by my cousins, you have to make the baby sleep on the bed with you. I said, okay. So I invested into this really extra large bed and I thought, oh, my baby's going to sleep with me and my husband's going to be here as well. But then when my baby actually arrived, I realized that they are such noisy sleepers. They grunt, they move, and I am a very light sleeper. Not to mention, I actually wasn't breastfeeding her. I was exclusively pumping. So I had also read that if you're not breastfeeding, then you should not be bed sharing with your baby because there is that risk of you not being aware of their movements or if you fall into a very deep sleep. So all in all, I was just very scared of bed sharing. So what I did was I just ditched the idea of that large family bed. Instead, I got her a small crib, put it right next to my bed. And Sanchita, you would not believe the criticism I got for it from the relatives around me. They were like, how could you do that? And I'll just say it in Hindi. They'll just be like, हमने तो अपने बच्चों को अपने साथ सुलाया था. That's how they grow. That's how it's supposed to be. And I felt so bad for it. But then I was just like, hey, that's what's working for me. Like, I don't want to bed share with my baby because I am scared shitless at night that I'm going to hurt her or my hand is going to go over her or something's going to happen. And I just couldn't co-sleep with her. How was that experience for you, Sanchita? Because you had...
I remember for the twins, when they were born, I just knew that, okay, the first 6 months, I had to have them in the room because I know that babies wake up a lot. So for me, it was like, okay, we're going to have a crib on, because it's two. So we had a crib on each side of the bed. And I never even thought that they'd sleep on the bed. For me, it was always a crib. So they have their own space because I'm generally someone who's like, okay, everyone needs their space. They have their own area, and we are going to just have them in the room till 6 months, because then by 6 months they should be sleeping a good amount of time, so we can move them to the other room. I don't think they ever actually slept in our bed itself. I got a little bit of that commentary, but it wasn't like what you explained you went through. I can't imagine hearing that. And I think today, as modern Indian parents, we really are trying to do things that, it's not that what our parents didn't make sense, but I think now as parents, we're really trying to educate ourselves a bit more and make more conscious decisions.
I think that's what it's about, right? Like owning our parenting choices. So I think I went through this, but anybody who's listening to this, I want to give you the information to be able to make a different choice if you want to. And if once you have made that choice, and also kind of be able to defend that choice to your family.
I wanna talk to you a bit about the benefits of co-sleeping, because when we look at it and the statistics that you mentioned to us, right? Like 90% of the population in India, they actually are co-sleeping with their baby. So there must be some advantages to it. So what are the actual benefits of it?
There are a lot of benefits of bed sharing, and nobody can ever deny that, because it allows for better bonding with the baby, especially at night. Especially if you're a parent who works outside of the home, then having that close physical proximity with the baby at night can be beneficial for both baby and the parent. It helps to strengthen the breastfeeding relationship, because a lot of babies do prefer to feed at night as well. And many moms, they are just like, you know what, it's okay. As long as you're sleeping next to me, you can help yourself to the breast and go back to sleep. So it kind of strengthens and keeps up their milk supply. And of course, the main thing that they talk about why co-sleeping is great is because you kind of don't need to get up and soothe your baby. Studies have shown that while people are co-sleeping, there might be more night wakings, but those night wakings are much shorter, because the parent or mother, whether it's with the breast or whether it's by patting or shushing, however it is, they're able to resettle the babies much more quickly. And then that is actually one of the primary reasons why people describe that, like, oh, co-sleeping just saved me. It helped me get the sleep that I needed. It could be because of this big reason, whether they're able to settle the baby quite quickly.
Okay.
So these are the three big main advantages that I see of co-sleeping.
So I can see why a lot of Indian families do co-sleep. But then my question to you now is then in the US or in the Western side of the world, why are like 90% of the families not doing it? There must be a very strong reason as well for them to have their kids in a crib or have them in a separate room.
Of course. I think one of the main things why in Western countries co-sleeping is not recommended, and they are very clear about it, whether it's the American Academy of Pediatrics, whether it's Red Nose Australia, and the main issue that they bring out is safety. And this could be like baffling for a lot of families in India because they'll just be like, safety? If a baby is sleeping right next to the mother, how can safety be an issue? But in all honesty, it is. So if you're bed sharing with your baby, there is a heightened risk of what we call sudden unexpected infant deaths, and specifically under the category of accidental suffocation, which is something, can be the most heartbreaking thing that can happen, but it has happened to families, which has been documented all over the world, where if you're bed sharing with the baby, it is quite possible that either, you could roll onto them, or they could get accidentally suffocated by the bedding, which is usually present on an adult bed, right? You have pillows and blankets on any adult bed, and they could accidentally suffocate because of that, or they could fall off the bed and injure themselves, or they could fall between crevices between the bed and the wall, and that's where this could happen. So there are various scenarios in which, and very scary but very real scenarios, which do pose a safety risk when it comes to bed sharing. And because of these safety risks, a lot of the Western countries are like, do not co-sleep. Like, any advantage that you can derive from co-sleeping, it's not worth the risk that comes from bed sharing. You can room share, but don't bed share. And when I'm advising families, but then they are like, okay, fine, we understand that there is that safety concern, but how is it that we can make it safer? So I always tell them that do not co-sleep or bed share with your child under these 5 circumstances. 5 main things that I want you to just completely avoid bed sharing. 1, the baby was born prematurely, which is before the 36-week mark. Secondly, they were born underweight. Okay. Number 3, any of the parent or any caregiver who is sharing the bed with the baby is a smoker, because the nicotine in the smoke is known to impair the respiratory function of the baby. And it's not that you need to smoke in the room, even if there's lingering nicotine in your clothes or on you, that can also affect the baby. Number 4, if you are under the influence of alcohol or any drowsy medication, or are at a point where you are so sleep deprived that you would just fall into extreme deep sleep and you'll be very difficult to rouse. So this is another condition. And the last one, and this is, I'm going to tell you, a very controversial one in Indian families, is that the only people who should be bed sharing with your baby are the mother and the father. And that's it. If the mother is breastfeeding, then the baby is safest with her. Next to her, if she's not available, then the dad can bed share with the baby. But other caregivers, such as grandmas, grandpas, nannies, they should not be allowed to bed share with a child under the age of 1 year, because the simple thing is that they are not tuned in, and they are not wired to be conscious of every single movement that the baby makes, and it is just not safe for the baby to sleep with them. Definitely do not let your child bed share with another child, because again, other children, they are like so active sleepers, they are moving around. There's a possibility that may actually end up cutting the baby at night. So these are the 5 circumstances in which I want you to completely avoid bed sharing.
So can you explain why the first 2 are important? Because you said underweight and premature. So how does that make their situation different?
Of course. Now, it has been well studied that babies who are born underweight or who are born prematurely, they are carrying additional risk factors to SIDS. So, and also because they're definitely, they're slightly weaker, and they're smaller as well in size. So that's another reason why we have to be extra, extra careful around them. So you can't have them right next to you, but have them in a crib in their own sleep space while you sleep on the bed, because the risk is much higher. You want to lower the risk of any form of mishap by not bed sharing.
Got it. And when you spoke about the last point as well, make sure it's only the parents who are co-sleeping. I know a lot of families, so even if the baby's in a different room, the nanny tends to sleep, in the same room. So if the baby wakes up, the nanny will wake up and, feed the baby. And then sometimes if the baby's not settling, what happens is they take the baby down to their bed and just sleep with the baby to kind of settle them down. So that is definitely not a good idea, right?
Not at all. Not at all. So if you want to have the nanny sleep in a different room with the baby, but the baby is in a crib and nanny's on her own bed, that is okay. And the same arrangement can apply to any other caregiver as well. But being in the same bed, that is not okay. I would tell you, especially not for a baby who's under the age of 6 months, because under the age of 6 months, the risk of SUID is the highest. But even up till the age of 1 year, they should not be bed sharing with anybody except the parents.
Yeah. This is, I think, so important for all the parents to know that, because I know a lot of nannies do this. They'll just take the baby and say, okay, just to calm them down, let them sleep next to me. I know this happens a lot. So definitely, keep an eye out for that, and talk to your nanny. I remember sending you a screenshot of Kourtney Kardashian because she just had a baby, and she's all about co-sleeping. And I'm like, oh my God, like she's co-sleeping. Is it okay? And you were like, yeah, because she's doing it the right way. And I was like, oh, okay. So what is the right way?
I'm so glad that you're asking me about what is the right way of co-sleeping, because there really are specific guidelines to ensure that you are co-sleeping safely. These guidelines are actually released by the La Leche League International, and they are called the Safe Sleep 7. And that's something that I just want to quickly run through. And it does overlap with a lot of the 5 things that I just said. The bed sharing should not happen with somebody who's smoking, not somebody who's been drinking. If you're bed sharing, make sure that you do not swaddle your baby. I know swaddling newborns is very helpful for them to get them to sleep well. But if you are bed sharing with a newborn, please do not swaddle them. I see so many parents who are swaddling their babies and sleeping right next to them. That is not safe.
Wow.
If you're co-sleeping or you're bed sharing with a newborn, you need to let their arms be open, because they need to be able to remove anything that may accidentally
Comes
cover
in the
their
way.
face. So if you don't want to swaddle them, you don't want to cover them with your own adult blanket, because that is also a suffocation hazard. All you got to do is get a sleep sack for them. Another thing is to
But
look
even
at
at
sleep environment.
even at like 1-2 months, they can already be in like a sleep sack.
Most definitely, you can have a baby in a sleep sack from birth onwards. If you're not swaddling the baby, but you still want to keep them covered and comfortable, then you can use a sleep sack from as soon as they're born.
But isn't the swaddle about them feeling snug, and in a sleep sack they're kind of like all over the place? I know for safety it's that, but is it still okay?
If you are bed sharing, then safety takes precedence. Your child will learn to sleep and kind of get over that motor reflex. Maybe you will have to resettle them a little bit more, but that's okay. Safety is most important. So instead of swaddling, just let them use a sleep sack instead. Another thing that I want parents to look at is to evaluate the space of their bed and make sure that there are no extra loose items on the bed. I want you to remove all pillows, all blankets. The bed should be absolutely clear. I see parents do very often is that they tend to make a pillow fort around the bed. I don't know if you have seen that before, but like, let's say instead of making them sleep on the crib, they make them sleep on the bed, and then they take like 8 or 10 pillows and line the entire bed with it. And believe it or not, that is a huge risk for the baby, simply for 2 reasons. Number one, the pillow itself is a suffocation hazard. And number two, once your child is actively crawling or rolling, they can very easily fall off the bed. And any bed nowadays is easily like 3 feet above the ground. And a 3 feet fall can be a very major fall for a child. So if you are getting the baby to sleep on the bed with you, I would say invest into bed rails. You get those like mesh bed rails with a metal frame around it. Invest in those, because that is a much safer way. And if you don't want to get bed rails, then just make your child sleep on the crib at least when they are not being actively supervised by you.
And I know the some of the cribs, they have it where you can open one side. It kind of becomes an extension of the bed. Is that something that can work?
Absolutely. So those are called co-sleepers. Now, with co-sleepers, the main thing is that one side that you just mentioned, it opens up into the bed. So it allows the parent to be able to reach the baby very quickly breastfeed them and put them back into the sleep space. And that can be an option that does work for a lot of families. There are two things that I have seen in terms of drawbacks of co-sleepers as well. Number one, the baby ends up on your bed eventually, right? Because they are just like, why should I sleep in this like tiny 2 by 2 space when you've got this gigantic bed right next to me? So then what ends up happening is that the other thing is that the co-sleepers are generally very low in height, right? Because if they want to be on the same level as your bed, the boundary around them is quite short. Let's say if your baby is a newborn or is barely able to sit up, it's okay. But once your baby is 7, 8 months old, they can pull themselves up to sit. By the time they're 9 or 10 months old, they can pull themselves up to stand. You can imagine how it could be a fall risk, where if they're sleeping on the co-sleeper, you leave the room, they stand up, and that is also something that is rather dangerous.
This just reminded me of a memory of my kids, and I know I just need to ask you this because literally my kids have fallen off the crib when they were, I think, 6 7 months, when they learned to kind of push themselves up. I would keep them in the crib, and then they were awake and they kind of just toppled over. How do you keep them safe in a crib in that way?
The thing with the crib is that most cribs will come with either 2 or 3 levels, and you need to move the base of the crib down based on your child's development. So assuming that your child's crib had 3 levels, the top level is something that you use for the first 4 months when your child is practically just laying down. They have not yet developed the ability to pull themselves up to sit. Some babies, they are actually able to do that as early as 5 months. So the very moment you see that your child is able to pull themselves up into a sitting position or go into a cobra position, that is when you need to move it to the middle level. And the very moment you see that your child is kind of getting strong enough to pull themselves up to stand. And I'm not talking like, oh, they have mastered that. No. The very moment they even start trying to pull themselves up so that they can get into a standing position, you need to put the crib to the bottommost level. And that is the way how you can use a crib safely.
It's very clear that one of the main drawbacks of co-sleeping is the safety issue. But I really want to talk a little bit about sleep, and not only sleep for babies, but sleep for parents. I know a lot of parents, if they're breastfeeding, they get tired co-sleeping and having to feed throughout the night, and babies get really attached to that. So is that a drawback of co-sleeping?
See, the thing with co-sleeping and breastfeeding, that relationship, I think of it that there are two sides to every coin. Somebody who's a big proponent of co-sleeping, they will tell you it helps to strengthen that breastfeeding relationship and helps them to get a lot of calories at nighttime as well.
Yeah.
And I think that is great. And those are real advantages of co-sleeping when you're breastfeeding. But the other side of it is that every time your child needs to breastfeed at night, and often they're not doing it just out of hunger, there's a big, strong sleep association that they have formed with breastfeeding, that your child is just nursing throughout the night. Sure, you get a great milk supply out of it, but your sleep is compromised heavily. And that is something that I see when I'm working with mummies. A lot of them, they are like, I am feeding in the slide-like position, my baby comes, latches, they leave. I don't even realize I'm getting great sleep. This is working for me. I'm like, great. But there is a huge number of moms. They are like saying, my baby comes, he feeds, he leaves, but I am fully awake after that, and it just keeps happening every hour, and I am not getting any sleep. And I just want to tell mummies who are in this situation that please don't feel guilty about this, because if you're feeling tired and exhausted by these repetitive night feeds, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not supposed to be able to enjoy every moment of breastfeeding, especially when you're really craving some good quality, uninterrupted sleep. And you know what? In these scenarios, one thing that I always tell parents is that either you can get your child to sleep on a different sleep surface, and that itself will kind of address this whole thing about snacking throughout the night at the breast, or you can consider sleep training. And with sleep training, once your child learns how to sleep without the breast, they'll be able to sleep all night, do that on their own, and you get the sleep you need, they get the sleep they need, and you can just continue breastfeeding them during the day to get them the milk that they need for their healthy growth. I do
Yes,
work with
that's
a
a
lot of
tough one.
mummies. Yeah, they will come to me and then they will ask me that, like, you know what, I don't want to stop co-sleeping with my baby, but I also don't like being milk on tap throughout the night. Like, that is too much
Yeah.
for me. And I want my baby to be able to sleep either with the other parent or just not need the breast throughout the night. What can I do about it? So there are 4 tips that I want to give you if you are co-sleeping but you want to start night weaning. So I'll give you 4 C's to follow for this. And this is something that I will teach all my clients. The first one is consistent boundaries. Okay, and this is the most important thing for you to reduce night feeds, is that you need to help your child understand that, let's say you choose the boundary that between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. we are not going to feed, because for that 7 hours I want you to be able to sleep at night. This boundary is something that can work very well with a baby who's 7-8 months old and above. And what you need to do is that during that period you stay very consistent with that we are not going to feed during this period. I will love you, I will cuddle you, I will sing to you, I will shush you, I can give you some water, but we are not going to breastfeed. And when you do this, sure, on the first night, second night, third night, your baby is going to give you hey, but I need you to stay strong and stay consistent. Because the very moment you are inconsistent with this approach, your baby gets confused. And then once they get confused, they're just like, why is it that I was allowed to breastfeed at 2 a.m. last night, but I'm not today? And then that will lead to a fresh round of tears and lots more protests. So just stay consistent. The second C I'll give you is what I call a caregiver switch. So one thing with breastfeeding mummies, especially if your child is nursing throughout the night, is that you are in charge of all nights, every night. You are sleeping next to your baby. Nobody else is kind of involved in your child's sleep equation. And that is clearly weighing too heavily on you. What you need to do is that you need to get other caregivers involved, starting at the bedtime routine and taking over some part of the night, so that your child can start associating things other than the breast. Like, if you get daddy involved, the whole option of breastfeeding goes away. Like they say, right?
Yeah.
Like, your baby's gonna be really mad because he's gonna find the dad's useless nipples and go like, what are you doing here? But then eventually dad is still dad. Dad loves your baby and he can hug him, cuddle him, rock him, soothe him in his own ways, and get him to understand that breast is not the only way that you can fall asleep, darling. Okay, so try the caregiver switch. The third one is comforting in other ways. At the end of the day, especially for older babies and toddlers, breast at night is mostly not out of hunger. They are not feeding because they're like super, but if they're only using the breast for comfort, why don't we let our child learn other ways of comforting themselves? Breast is not the only way. As I mentioned earlier, cuddle them, rock them, sing to them. There can be a particular song or like a humming sound that you make that they can start associating with sleep. So there are all the other ways that you can teach your child to comfort them. And when you start doing that, they will start dissociating breast with sleep. And last, and a very important one, and this is something you can start doing this for a baby as early as 8 or 9 months old. It definitely works a lot better with older babies, and it is communicate. And I'll teach you a very simple way of communicating with them. For example, you're trying to wean night feeds and you are saying that, like, I will still feed you, but we'll feed in the day. So whatever name that you have for your breast, like I have seen some moms call it nurses, some call it milkies, some just say boo-boo. So whatever it is that they use for milk, use that word and then say that in the morning. So you can just say milkies in the morning or milkies when the sun shines. So you use a particular phrase and you try communicating this to your child before you make this change and while you're making this change. So your child understands that it's not that milkies are gone forever. I will get my milkies, but milkies will happen in the morning. And then when morning comes about, then you can feed them. And believe me, children understand so much more than they can speak and so much more than we think they understand. Use these 4 big steps of having consistent boundaries, having a caregiver switch, comforting in other ways, and communicating with your child to be able to wean night feeds while you're bed sharing.
Wow. Yeah. So it is possible. I think a lot of people just feel like it's impossible. They can't handle the crying and all of that. But, if when you break it down and give these tips, you can start implementing it. And I think the main thing you said is consistency, because also even when it comes to meal times and changes, like, of course, if you are going to suddenly change the routine for your child or do something different, they're not going to happily be like, okay, cool. They are going to have a little bit of a rebuttal. They are going to be like, what's happening? But once you're consistent and you set those boundaries, that's where the difference comes in and where you see that change. What I just want to tell parents, and I'm sure you agree, is that it's never too late. You can always make a change, and it can always be positive. And we just grow as parents, as people. And the best we can do is educate ourselves and do our best. So, especially if you're listening to this episode and you want to make that change, it's never too late. What about people who have a baby and, they're co-sleeping, or are just at that stage where they're like, we want them to move to their own crib now, or their bed, or their own room? How would they even start with that? What is the right age and how to do it?
The transitioning to your baby to their own sleep space, there's no right age for it. You can do it as early as when they're born, till whenever you feel that like bed sharing is just no longer working for your family, nobody's getting the sleep that they need, everybody's feeling disturbed, then you can transition your child to another sleep space. The way to do it is that you can choose how you want to go about this transition, right? There are two pathways that I can recommend for you. The first one is the gradual, gentle pathway, where you're slowly helping your child understand and adjust to that sleep space. Firstly, you have to make that space more familiar to your child. So children, they connect their sleep space through their senses, through the sense of touch, through the sense of smell.
Okay.
So what you can do is that firstly, let's take their crib sheet and make sure that's a really good quality one, something similar to what you use on your own bed, and make it smell like you. Take that crib sheet, just put it inside your cupboard amongst your clothes, or you sleep on it for like 1 or 2 days and it will pick up your scent.
Nice.
And
Yeah.
then you use that crib sheet on their crib, so that it starts to smell familiar and starts to smell the same that it does on your bed. The other way for them to build connection with the crib is through play. With older babies, you can even do role play with using some teddies, some dolls, and putting those teddies and dolls into the crib for sleep time. Make a game out of it. Basically, what you're trying to do is build positive connections with the crib, right? You don't want that to be a place of fear. The third thing that I will tell you to do is when you make this transition, be close by. So even if you're transitioning your child to a different room or the crib is right in your room, be very close by to the child, because they are very used to that close proximity with you. So they should be able to sense you, hear you, smell you right next to them while they're in the crib. And then just stay consistent with settling them in the crib. Okay, and that's where the consistency element comes in as well. Let's say the first night that you put your baby in the crib, they woke up one time, you put them back in the crib. They woke up the second time, you put them back in the crib. By the third time, you are like, you know what? I can't do this anymore. I'm just going to bring the baby back into my bed. You see, what happens is that this kind of reinforcement teaches the child that, like, why is my parent bothering to put me in the crib? Why can't they just bring me into the bed the first time, that I wake up? So then the acceptance for that crib kind of goes down, because that consistency is not there. But if you really commit to it, you will see that increase in acceptance towards it. And the second way that you can transition your baby to their own sleep space, whether it's a crib, whether it's a toddler bed, depending on their age, is sleep training, okay? Because I'll tell you, the first way that I mentioned, it is a lot of hard work and it is difficult for parents to stay consistent with it, because the transfers and everything get too much for them, and the night wakings may or may not always reduce. So, okay, if you are ready for your child to sleep in their own sleep space and you want them to sleep all night, consider sleep training. It is such an effective way of teaching your child how to sleep on their own, so that when they are in the crib, they kind of roll around, babble a little bit, and you just go off to sleep and they sleep there all night. It does come with its own challenges as well, in terms of how do you sleep train, what's the right method, how do you handle the tears and everything. So both options are available depending on what feels right for your parenting style as well as what your sleep goal is. Choose the path to transition your baby to their own sleep space.
I really love this episode because it's not like we're saying you have to do this, you have to do that. It's more like here's a situation. If this relates to you and what you feel comfortable with, here are the steps that you can take to make it work for you and your family. And I find this so enlightening. So thank you so much for that.